And I'm thrilled to have you all here. One of the programs that we offer is this Lunch at the Library series. We do several other programs also, so if any of you are interested or know folks that would like to help us, what we do is preserve literature by and about Nebraska authors in the beautiful Heritage Room on the third floor of this library. So please reach out if you're interested in more information or possibly even joining us. But today, we are lucky to have Uche Okonkwo here. She's going to speak to us about her book, A Kind of Madness. And a little bit about Uche. Her stories have been published in A Public Space, One Story, The Kenyon Review, Plowshares, The Best American Non-Required Reading of 2019, and Lagos Noir, among others. I always mention, Uche, that it was one of Oprah Winfrey's most anticipated books of the year. She's a former Bernard O'Keeffe Scholar at the Breadloaf Writers Conference and resident at Art Olney, and a recipient of the George Bennett Fellowship at Phillips Exeter Academy, a Steinbeck Fellowship, and an Elizabeth George Foundation grant. Uche grew up in Lagos, Nigeria. She's currently pursuing a creative writing PhD at the University of Nebraska right here in downtown Lincoln. So please give a warm welcome to Uche Okonkwo.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. I was not expecting this many people to show up the day after the election, but yeah, I'm grateful that everyone is here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my writing, some of the things that inspire me, talk about how the book came together, and then I'll read a few excerpts from the book. So yeah, I'm a fiction writer. I write primarily short stories. I was born and raised in Nigeria, came to the US for grad school in 2017. I lived in Virginia for a few years, went to Virginia Tech for my MFA, and now I am here in Lincoln, Nebraska, and it's been a great experience. I loved it more than I love it more than I had expected to when I came here. So that was a positive. So my stories are mostly about Nigerians and Nigerian life. It's what I know best. It's what's most familiar to me. My stories tend to revolve around themes of dysfunctional families, fraught interpersonal relationships. I write about mothers and daughters a lot as well. I write about religion and the gender double standard, particularly as it manifests within the context of Nigerian Pentecostalism. So this is my book, A Kind of Madness. It was published in April of this year. So a little bit about the way this book came together. The stories in this collection were written over a period of maybe 10 years. And this is because when I first started writing short stories, I wasn't writing them with the intention of writing a short story collection. I was just writing short stories. And over time, I accumulated enough short stories that it made sense to start to think of putting them together in the format of a book. So I was able to get an agent, and together we worked on all these stories that I had written, and we were thinking about how to present them in this single book format, given that they were not necessarily written for that intention, and they were written over such a long span of time that some of the more recent stories in the collection feel more like who I am today, and the older stories feel like a different version of me in some ways. So it was a strange experience trying to gather all these stories into a single book. Sorry, some of the things that I learned from I don't know. Okay. Oh, it's a phone. Okay. So some of the things I learned from the process of putting this book together. Uh, um, so even though I wasn't writing these stories to write a single collection, in reading the stories and trying to put them together into a single unit, it became clear that the stories do have themes that resonate across, and they're speaking to each other in ways that I didn't necessarily intend when I was writing the individual stories. So the thematic concerns and kind of also the locations, the settings, all of these came together in a way that made the story collection feel somewhat cohesive, even though they were not written to exist together in a book. And so I think that's one of the interesting things about putting together a short story collection. People do it in all kinds of different ways. Some people do linked short story collections, and that was something that me and my agent had explored, the idea of maybe linking these short stories because they are kind of connected in these ways. But that was something I eventually ended up deciding not to do. I think it was enough that the themes and some of the obsessions that I have in my own writing life were coming across strongly enough in the book, I think, that I didn't need to go the extra step of trying to link the stories through the characters or something like that. A few things that inspire and influence my work, I would say the old Nigerian movies that I grew up watching are part of my influence for fiction. They feature a lot of dramatic women, particularly dramatic mothers and mothers-in-law. And some of these actors and some of the characters that they've played served as inspiration for some of my stories, although I tried to make them a bit more subtle than what we have in those films. Another thing, too, about the Nigerian movies is the depictions of myths and traditions and how they shaped the lives of characters was something I also took from those movies. And also the over-the-top depictions of religion as a magical kind of solution to all problems. But I try to twist that on its head a little bit when I write fiction. I'm also inspired by other Nigerian authors, particularly Chinua Achebe, who was a novelist, best known for the novel Things Fall Apart, that depicts a traditional Igbo society in colonial times through the lens of a particular, very proud Igbo man. And in this novel, we see that clash of the colonial influence and the native traditions and the consequences of that meeting. So these are a few things that inspire my work. My stories tend to be feature a lot of child characters, children in peril. I've heard that my stories are funny, even though I think that that's a good thing, although I don't think of myself as a funny person, but somehow I hear that my stories are funny. But some of the themes can be difficult, so I think it's good that there's some humor to balance that out. Yeah, but we'll see what you think, whether it's funny or not. I've heard, when I've done readings in public, I've heard laughter in some strange, unexpected areas, and I don't know what to make of that, but we'll see. Okay, so I'm going to read my first excerpt. It's going to be from a short story called Burning, and in this story, we see a young girl of about 10. She's caught up in her mother's cycle of grief and trauma, and her mother is constantly trying to fix the thing that she thinks is wrong with their lives, and she projects that brokenness onto her daughter in interesting ways. I'll read a very short excerpt from this one. It's called Burning. Bless you. Adana knows her mother's faces. There is a face for the days when she wakes up with a light in her eyes, and they stay home eating sweet balls of puff-puff. batches and batches pouring out of her mother's pan and forming small steaming hills on every surface in the kitchen. On days like this, they rewatch her mother's collection of Nollywood films, in which good and evil are separate like oil and water, and justice comes swift from heaven in the form of lightning. On other happy days, they visit Tejuosho Market and make their way through a maze of closed shops, male traders whistling at their backsides and grabbing at their arms, and Adana's mother throwing smiles at them over her shoulder, while Adana tries to shrink herself to nothing. When they return home with piles of clothes, Adana's mother says with a conspiratorial wink, "Good thing it's your grandfather's money paying for all this." There come the days when her mother is unable to drag herself out of bed. On these days, her face is pale with fear, her eyes darting at the slightest sound. Adana's mother buries this face in a pillow and refuses to get up, and Adana makes her own breakfast, a cup of Milo and 2 slices of bread, and eats it standing in the quiet kitchenette. Then, in the bedroom she and her mother share, she puts on her blue shirt and pink pinafore and heads for the front door, hoping to hear her mother's voice call out at the last moment with an offering, to walk with her, maybe, or a promise to be there when the bell rang at the end of the school day. One time, her mother did call out to her from under the bedding, told Adana to hold on as she put on a t-shirt and tied a wrapper around her waist. She took Adana's hand along with a deep breath, and they walked out the door together. The pressure of her mother's grip, the quiet slapping of her slippers against her feet, made up for those mornings Adana had walked alone. With her mother holding her hand, Adana would not have to tug at strangers' sleeves at the busy junction and ask for help to cross the road. But barely halfway to school, her mother's fingers went limp and let go of Adana's. Her mother sank, squatting in the street and burying her face in her hands. Adana stood, stunned, feeling naked as strangers stared at them. She wanted to keep walking and ignore the anchor pulling her down, pretend that the moaning ball of flesh had no connection to her. She resisted the urge to scream at her mother, at the sky, at all the people watching them but moving on, minding their business. Instead, she knelt on the warm asphalt and rubbed her mother's back in circles, around and around. The noise of traffic and hawkers and conversation faded until all she could hear was her mother's muffled sobbing. When Adana's mother stood again, it was Adana's hand holding hers, guiding her back home. I'm going to stop there for that one. This one never gets any laughter, so this one is not funny. And it gets progressively less funny as the story continues. So yeah. The next one I'm going to read is called Eden. And in this story, I am looking at hypocrisy on the part of parents and a culture of silence around sex and sexuality. So just a little bit of setup for this story, since I won't be reading from the beginning. So what the premise of this story is, there's a family made up of a mother and a father and 2 siblings, a boy and a girl. The boy is 10 and the girl is 7. The boy is Madu, the girl is called Ifechi. So one day, Ifechi and Madu are home alone and they are bored looking through the house, and they discover their father's stash of pornography. And the story is set in Lagos, Nigeria in the 90s. And so the pornography is in cassettes, like VCR cassette tapes. And so one thing to know about Nigeria is we get a lot of power cuts. It's very unpredictable, there's no warning. And so the children start watching their father's pornography in these VCR player. And one day they're watching one of the tapes and then the electricity is cut off. And what that means is the cassette is stuck in the VCR and they can't get it out. And yeah, so they get into trouble. But the part of this story that I'm going to be reading from is before they get into trouble. They started watching the tapes, but they haven't gotten caught yet. And at this stage, they're starting to lose their innocence, and this thing that they're learning is starting to affect how they see themselves and how they see their family. This portion that I'll be reading from is from the point of view of the little girl, Ifechi, who is 7 years old. One rainy night, when there was no electricity, the children played catch the light with their father. Their mother lay on the couch, laughing and shouting warnings. Catch the light was their game, invented by their father for nights like this, when electricity was gone and stomachs were full, and the silence in the room had no extra weight to it. He would put out the candles and let the warm darkness surround them. Then he would turn on his flashlight and move the beam of light on the floor and all around the room, the children scrambling to touch it with their hands or feet. It was the only game they played together. The stakes were high on this night. Their father had promised the winner 3 over-the-head spins to be redeemed at any time of the winner's choosing. Madu and Ifechi loved being held above the head of their tall father, loved opening their eyes to see the furniture, barely discernible in the dark, whirling around them. A dizzying sensation remained after they were set down gently, like honey lingering on their tongues. But most of all, they loved the chafing feel of their father's palms as he gripped them, and they imagined that his hands left an imprint that remained long after he let go. The children rushed from spot to spot, shrieking and stretching their limbs towards the light. But just when they thought they'd got it, the light would move away and they would laugh out their frustration. The light was all they could see, and they followed wherever it went, sometimes bumping into each other and their father. One time, their father directed the beam of light to a spot close to his feet. Ifechi followed, but instead of chasing the light, her eyes landed on her father's right foot. The nail of his big toe was long, yellow from the light. Specks of dirt or lint stuck in the corners where nail met skin. Ifechi could not move. In one of her father's films, a man had moaned in ecstasy while he kissed and nibbled on a woman's foot, sucked on the dainty toes with their red nail polish, opened his mouth wide as half of the woman's foot vanished into it. Ifechi felt her heart pounding as she pulled her eyes away from her father's foot. She glanced at her mother's dark form on the couch. Had her mother's feet ever disappeared into the mouth of her father like that, like prey being consumed by a python? Had her father made sounds just like the man in the film, like he was dying but didn't want it to stop? Ifechi tried to find her father's face in the gloom, certain that he knew what she was thinking, what she and Madu had done. But he was still moving the light, and Madu was still running and screaming. Everything felt normal. When their father was ready to let someone win, it was Madu who was chosen. Madu and their father spun together, their laughter filling the empty spaces in the room, while Ifechi watched with remorse from her place on the ground. Okay, I'm going to stop there for that one. The next thing I'm going to read is a story from, it's an excerpt from a story called The Harvest. This one I've never read from before. I tend to avoid reading from it for some reason. But this story is about a couple, uh, a man and a woman. The man is the pastor of a struggling ministry, and a new church has moved into the area, and this church is causing problems for our main character's ministry. And his wife is trying to bring to his attention that this other ministry is a threat, but our main character is trying to ignore it and hoping for the best. But this story is about the conflict in their marriage, the conflict in the church, and the competition between these two churches. The main character is called Alfonso, and his wife is called Inimfon. When Komiyi Ministries first opened its doors on Igoke Street, just a short walk from Alfonso's own church, Alfonso's wife would, every few days, bring to his ears some fresh, searing detail about the pastor or the services, and watch his face, waiting for a reaction. It was from Inimfon's lips that Alfonso learned that the pastor of the new church was nicknamed Daddy Too Much because he had countless SUVs and an American wife. They say the first time the pastor and his wife met, she fell flat on her face. She couldn't even stand to shake his hand because of the power of his anointing. After glancing at Alfonso's stony face, Inimfon added, "People will believe anything. Can you imagine?" But as the months passed, Inimfon's reports slowly gave way to a silence that was broken only to carry out the necessary logistics of their daily lives. And so that morning, they were both quiet as they prepared for church, their separate routines long established. Alfonso stood before the cracked mirror on their bedroom wall and considered putting on a jacket and a tie. It was a cold morning, but he knew that by afternoon, the heat and humidity would be clutching at his neck, causing rivers of sweat to flow down his back. He buttoned up his shirt and tucked it into slightly oversized pants that he held up with a peeling belt. When he marched out to his old car, holding his King James Bible and sermon notes, Inimfon was already seated in the passenger's side. Alfonso settled in beside her and turned on the engine. He glanced at Inimfon. She was not wincing at the engine's angry rattling like she often did, nor was she dabbing at sweat on her face or fanning her neck with an old church flyer. She did not lean forward to fiddle with the air conditioner, which hadn't worked in years. Before her reign of silence began, Inimfon had mentioned that if you stepped inside the new church without a jacket, you could catch a fever from the sheer power of the AC. She delivered this information on a Sunday 6 months ago, while she helped set up for service in the assembly hall of the primary school in Obalende, where Alfonso's church met. Standing with arms akimbo, she'd glared up at the ceiling fans that spread warm, dusty air throughout the room. Again, Alfonso said nothing, and after an eternity of silence, his wife had sighed. Alfonso imagined that sigh as a eulogy for dead dreams, and in that moment, the entire weight of his failures came and sat on his shoulders like a yoke. That same Sunday, during the service, Alfonso had found himself announcing the start of a fundraising campaign, the first of its kind for his church, which he said would enable the church to acquire their own worship space. He called the campaign "Build Him a House." Because the campaign had been divinely inspired and certainly had nothing to do with the new church a few streets away, Alfonso had decided that the 42 members of his congregation, none of whom were particularly well off, would somehow be able to raise the millions they would need to buy land in the Lekki area, where their church was destined to stand. God would work out the details in his mysterious ways. Alfonso had begun tailoring all of his sermons towards the same message: the negative consequences of a tight fist and the blessings that came from giving, and giving generously to God and his causes. He'd also begun sending his members multiple text messages each week with Bible quotes and reminders about God's love for cheerful givers. Alfonso had pretended not to notice his membership numbers slowly dwindling, refused to acknowledge the empty spaces opening up where bodies used to warm the benches. Each time an infant presented him with the attendance numbers after a service, he would say the same thing he always said: "Glory be to God." Last Sunday, after his usual response, she'd asked quite loudly, "Glory be to God for only 7 people?" She didn't wait for an answer, and as she turned away, her words burrowed under his skin. Alfonso had married Inimfon 8 years ago for her faith in him, for how readily she'd gone to the places he had envisioned. Before they were married, she would sit in his congregation week after week, and when he shared his prophecies for the future of his ministry, her hallelujahs were the loudest. He'd had no choice but to notice her. Her enthusiasm, the intensity of her gaze on him as he preached, bestowed upon her an alluring quality. Many Sundays she would stay behind after the service to chat, and with time she began to materialize right there with him when he saw himself leading the mega church of his future, standing tall beside him in low heels and the old brown hat she wore every Sunday. What had happened instead was that Inimfon, after she'd moved into his one-room Face Me, I Face You apartment in Mushin and bemoaned the single backyard kitchen and fought 9 other tenants over the shared bathrooms, decided that Alfonso's income from the church would not sustain them, and neither would the heavenly manna that he prophesied would rain down on them any moment. When she suggested that Alfonso get a job, he pointed out that he already had one. Harvesting the souls of men was full-time work. One could not serve God and mammon, didn't she know? Of course, Alfonso knew that some preachers had businesses or jobs outside of their churches, but he suspected that this, taking one's eye off the work of ministry, was a slow but sure path to corruption. Besides, he had no head for business, and his only qualification was his calling, which he had dropped out of Lautech to answer, a decision he tried never to dwell on. He'd quoted scriptures to Inimfon about ravens bringing food to Elijah, given her sermons on supernatural provision. In the meantime, he'd said they could make do with eating 2 small meals a day. Their hunger might do their souls some good, sharpen their faith. But Inimfon's faith had not held. She'd taken a loan from her sister and paid for a shed near Mushin Market, where she cooked and sold food to traders and commuters. When they were not at church, Inimfon was at her shed, chopping and pounding and frying. Whenever Alfonso offered help, like a good husband, she turned him down. "Save your strength for the church," she would say with a voice that betrayed nothing. Okay, I'm going to stop there. The story progresses. Things don't get better. We have 20 minutes left. Are there any questions? I think we can do Q&A, and if there aren't questions, I could maybe do another reading. But yeah, does anyone have questions for me? Yes.
Just out of curiosity, what did you learn about yourself writing these stories?
I always find that question difficult to answer just because of the span of time and the fact that each story is its own different experience. And some of these are so old, I don't even remember who I was when I wrote them. Um, One thing. Let me see. One thing that I learned from writing these stories, I think, is that a lot of my stories have child characters. So I think there's a part of me that's constantly like looking back on my own childhood and trying to make sense of it through fiction. Some of the experiences came from a place of real life, my own experiences. Some of them are not, they're fictionalized. So I think I learned that maybe like many people, or maybe not like many people, I don't know. I'm kind of obsessed with the past. And maybe that's a bad thing, I don't know. But I think also something that I learned about putting the stories together into a single book is that I have been obsessed with the same things for a long time. In some ways, I worry that I am writing the same story over and over again. I mean, the stories are different, but the concerns are kind of similar. And yeah, so that's something I learned, something I'm also a little worried about. Am I going to keep writing the same stories over and over again till I die? Hopefully not. But yeah, I hope that answers the question somewhat.
What about the title?
Oh, the title, A Kind of Madness. Yes, so the title came from one of the stories in the collection. So in putting the book together, thinking about the title, I was thinking about whether I wanted to title the book after one of the stories in the collection, but that didn't quite work out because I didn't like any of the individual story titles as the title of a book. I didn't think it worked very well. And so I read through the manuscript again, looking for maybe images or phrases or words that I felt captured something that was at the heart of all the stories. And so A Kind of Madness came from actually the first story in the collection, where a mother and a daughter are having a conversation about an experience that they've been through. And the daughter is able to see the ways in which she and her mother went wrong, but her mother is not able to get there. And so she sees her mother's stubbornness and lack of self-reflection as a kind of madness, is the way she describes it. And I think that captured what the whole book is trying to do, because every story in the book has at its center some kind of flawed thinking or flawed ideology that kind of gets in the way of the characters learning something or being the best version of themselves in a way. So all of these aspects of flawed thinking, I think of them as a kind of madness. So it's not really a literal madness. Most of the stories don't deal with mental illness. It's more of all these thought processes and ideologies that get in the way of the characters being their best version. Yeah, that's where the title comes from. Yes.
Is writing a pleasurable activity for you, or is it a trip into Dante's hell? And what is do you have a pattern when you're writing, getting up at a certain time? Do you follow like a pretty rigid schedule when you're in the throes of writing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for me, writing used to be a pleasurable thing. I've been writing since I was very little, and when I was young, and also maybe in my early teens and early 20s, it felt like a pleasurable thing. I think it became less pleasurable when I started to think of it as more than just a hobby. When I started to think of it as, oh, this could be a career, like I can actually do this. But when I first started writing, I was writing when I was very young, and usually I would show my stories to my dad, and he would like give me margin notes and feedback. And I didn't really know what he was doing, but it was nice that he took it seriously. But yeah, when I realized that writing could be something more than just my own private thing, then it became work in a way that is, I mean, what's that thing they say that if you find the thing you love, you will never work a day in your life? I don't know if that's true, honestly. Because I love writing, but it's definitely still work, for sure. So now it feels more fraught, writing. It feels more painful in a way. I think because as an adult, I'm more aware of the world. I'm more aware of the fact that stories will be received differently. I'm more aware of the fact that once a thing is out of your hands and in the hands of the public, you have no control over how it is received. I'm more aware of, because of the fact that writing is an aspect of my career, it feels more high stakes in a way that I don't always enjoy. Yeah, so it's a mixed bag. I'll keep writing. I love writing. I will probably always write, but now it's mixed with some of these other things that make it more ambiguous in terms of like how it feels as an activity and as a career. So in terms of writing practice, yes, I do. I'm very much a creature of routine. I find comfort in routines. And I find any kind of variation from my routine is very stressful and very unpleasant for me, and I don't like uncertainty. So, I mean, the world is very uncertain, but so when it comes to my own like personal life and existence, I try to a fault to follow a routine. It's not always the best thing, but it gives me comfort. So when I write, I do have a routine. I like to write in the mornings. So I haven't written for a long time. I haven't been writing just because I'm more focused right now on finishing up my PhD. But when I am writing, I write in the mornings. I turn off my phone at night. I think this is something I can do because I don't have a husband or children or responsibilities. So I can turn off my phone at night when I go to bed. Because I like to write in the morning, I don't want to have my phone on because of the distraction. I know that it's just a small step turning on the phone, but when it's off, it feels like there's a line there that it's easier for me not to cross. So I turn off my phone at night. In the morning, I get up. First thing I do is write. And I like to write for a few hours before I turn on the phone and start to do other things or interact with people. It works that way for me because I feel like once I start to let in the outside world, I get so distracted, and it's really hard to focus on writing once I have started to absorb things from the outside. And so, yeah, that's how I usually write when I'm writing. That's my routine and my habit. I don't believe that a person has to write every day. I think that that's maybe somewhat unrealistic. I think it's about finding a routine that works for you and not being guilty about what you're able to do. I think that's more helpful. What do I do? Do I wrap it up? Okay. Okay.
As you said, what do I do? What you do is you accept the thanks and applause of all these people for sharing your stories with us today. And this is just a little token for you. We do love our coffee mugs around here, although we accept tea as well. And that's just a little thank you from NLHA and the Library Foundation and the libraries for coming and sharing your creativity and passion with these people here during lunchtime today. So thank you so much, Uche.
Thank you for coming.